Good morning, we are Ligi and Panepinto, and today we are presenting our paper, Reshaping Narratives, Authorship, Agency, and Digital Storytelling in Marginalized Settings. This paper explores the creation of a digital storytelling format named Sulle Mura, or On the Walls, specifically designed to amplify the voices of individuals detained at the 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏 prison in Milan. The work discussed here comes from a year-long experience of action research in the field, carried through design and storytelling methods. Situated in the heart of Milan, 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏 is, more properly, 𝗥𝗶𝗀𝗃𝗏𝗁, a penitentiary facility designated for the detention of individuals awaiting trial or sentenced to less than 5 years. This makes it a place of passage with complex dynamics. 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏 is in fact one of the oldest Italian penitentiary facilities in operation, facing many structural limitations, exacerbated by overcrowding problems. In October 2022, Politecnico di Milano opened off-campus 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏 as part of a social responsibility program. It is a space inside the prison that investigates 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏's complex reality and responds to its specific needs while promoting a constructive dialogue between the inside and the outside. Imagis Lab, a research group from the Department of Design of Politecnico di Milano, operates within this space. This research refers to ongoing activities focusing on the young adult section of the prison, which mostly holds detainees aged 18 to 25. The section presents a difficult situation as its inhabitants are at risk socially, economically, healthcare-wise, and mental health-wise, as emerged from the observation phase of the research. Specifically, we will focus on the narratives produced during StoryLab, a participative storytelling workshop held weekly in the prison by Imagis Lab. By exploring the imagination of those detained, the workshop provides expressive tools, and it collects narratives from 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏 with the dual goal of understanding this complex reality and communicating it externally. By generating a process of identification, reappropriation, reworking, and transformation through storytelling, it is intended to activate the co-design and collaborative construction of stories by enabling all actors involved to interpret and actively participate in narratives, promoting the construction of shared imagery. By acting in the space of creating and reinforcing community, both within the confined space of the prison walls and outside of them, it eventually tries to thin the wall between detention and freedom. The activity, based on an inclusive and participatory approach, is heavily reliant on a narrative-based design framework and a toolkit developed and tested during previous research projects. The 3 steps narrative framework is structured as followed. First, collection of fragments. Images are chosen by the participants from the toolkit provided and boosted by research proposal of questions or prompts. Second, crafting of stories. The beneficiaries are asked to narrate. Third, reframing of fragments, outputs or artifact realization by the participants, and content productions. The story that emerged are reworked by researchers in outputs of various kinds. The material coming from the activity, and therefore from the detained people, consists of a collection of mostly autobiographical fragments recording their experiences and their desires. They also include reflection from us as designer researchers, documenting our journey within this unique setting. We believe that developing a format to divulge the stories of the detained persons holds value at its core because it's about bringing the marginalized and their reality back into the public conversation. Sulle Mura aims to bridge the gap between the inside and the outside worlds by representing and respecting the fundamental humanity of the marginalized and their identities. Moving on to the realization of this format, we have to understand what motivates us when operating in such contexts. We understand prison as a marginalized setting, but the margins, as bell hooks intends them, are a space of resistance. Engaging with this concept of resistance entails granting the marginalized, in this case the detained, a space of action and thus of agency. By preserving the authorship they have on their own stories. This must be achieved by respecting the individuality of their voices, rendering them some control over how their lives are narrated to the outside world. So we ask ourselves, how can we create a format that remains faithful to the participatory ethos and inherently fragmented nature of stories collected within the prison, while offering the external audience an engaging and meaningful consumption experience? What parameters is Instagram as a platform bringing in the design consumption of 𝗏𝗏 format? How can we develop an open format to provide compelling and ever-evolving narratives from fragments? As we mentioned, Storylab's main result is collection of narrative fragments. Fragmentation and interactivity can be considered intrinsic to the narrative modes of social media platforms, as they are composed of multimodal microcontents. Here, interactivity is understood not only as the physical interaction with the content, but also the set of mental operations and processes that the user undertakes on a cognitive level to relate to the story. Given Instagram's interactive, micro-narrative-based and visual nature, we chose it as the central platform of our format, 𝗏𝗏. With its affordances, the platform aids, or rather shapes, the narrative. To deal with fragmentation and establishing a compelling narrative, we need to establish a narrative frame. We here consider Ursula Le Guin's career bag, a model in which the author sees narratives as a collection of human experiences, an entanglement of stories, a narrative model that is choral, less linear, and not necessarily concerned with confrontation. In a way, 𝗏𝗏𝘂𝗏 acts as the bag, where the stories of the detained are collected and carried. In this optic, 𝗏𝗏𝘂𝗏 is not only the bag, but also the frame for the overarching narrative. In terms of narrative and visual metaphor, as suggested by the format's name, we chose to utilize the image of a wall. The choice of the wall as a support for the stories comes primarily from the observation of the young adult sector, where many of the people detained there chose to decorate the walls with the comic book pages, photographs, and often pictures they take away from Storylab sessions. While hanging a poster in one's room is certainly not a new or revolutionary practice, we find that reclaiming a space on a wall to tell one's story is particularly significant inside a prison, a place where the detainee has little to no control over his material reality. The wall is also significant for the imagery regarding prisons, as it separates the outside world and the inside world. So, in our format, the feed of our Instagram account is the wall of 𝗏𝗏𝘂𝗏, seen simultaneously from two perspectives, from the inside looking out, as the eyes of the detained, and from the outside looking in, as the eyes of the public. This coincides with the researcher's perspective, as they act as bridges. To further develop the format, we organize the fragments into an open narrative structure, in which the narration progresses thematically, yielding a 𝗏𝗏𝘂𝗏 account for each emerging topic, highlighted by a representative quote. We translate themes into narrative arcs, connecting them by a specific fragment, acting as a bridge to transition into another topic. So the narrative structure resulting works with theme-driven plots and character-driven subplots, while the main narrative unravels thematically, inside it surfaces singular characters with singular stories. Moving to Instagram with its specific functions and tools, we see how said platform affordances, specifically posts, hashtag, and story highlights, structure and restructure micronarratives. While the contents are organized in different series of posts building a theme-driven plot, which relies also on page-specific hashtags, story highlights can be used to pin the fragments coming from the same narrator in one container, forming the character-driven subplots. Reconnecting different fragments to the same character narrator is important to preserve the integrity of individual voices. Other platform functions can be used to expand the narrative and make it more evocative. Specifically, we are interested in the use of pinned post as premise, fixing at the top of the page content to introduce the context, and the use of sound, adding audio on normal posts and reels, be they songs or sounds, to reconstruct atmospheres typical of the prison or related to the narrative itself, making the digital rendition of the fragment more evocative. This way, 𝗏𝗏𝘂𝗏 is born. We chose to treat the visuals with a half-tone filter as it renders the images less impactful, bringing the focus back on the stories. The posts, and therefore the fragments, are written from the point of view of us researchers. This point of view aligns more closely with the audience that is likely not to have experienced detention. This also allows us to clarify that everything is necessarily filtered through our eyes and our words. In closure, we think it is important to address the role of the designer in this kind of marginal context, which is a role of responsibility towards the storytellers. This responsibility is formed along the lines of protecting agency and authorship, all the while preserving the detained person in their delicate position. While this paper focuses on an Instagram storytelling format, our work has already expanded to include physical exhibitions and forthcoming podcasts, illustrating the diverse ways these stories can resonate. With our research, we are also trying to understand how different outputs are received not only outside of San Vittore, but also within its walls, working with co-design methods to bring detained individuals back into the public conversation actively with their own voice. Thank you for your attention.